We've all encountered them. The colleague who confidently derails meetings with misguided ideas. The family member who becomes an overnight expert after watching a single documentary. The online commenter who argues with trained professionals as if they've mastered the field. What drives this strange disconnect between confidence and competence? The answer lies in a psychological phenomenon discovered in 1999 by social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, the curious reality that the least skilled people are often the most confident, while true experts tend to underestimate themselves. As Dunning famously said, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is, you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. In this video, we'll explore its origins, how it works, real-world examples, and most importantly, how to recognize and overcome it in ourselves. Because the greatest paradox of the Dunning-Kruger effect is this: the people most affected by it are the least likely to realize it. The origins of the Dunning-Kruger effect trace back to one of the strangest crimes in modern history. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two banks in Pittsburgh in broad daylight with no disguise, robbed them, and simply walked out. Later that evening, when police arrested him, Wheeler was genuinely shocked. He exclaimed, "But I wore the juice." You see, he had rubbed lemon juice on his face, convinced it would make him invisible to surveillance cameras, because lemon juice can be used as invisible ink. This bizarre case fascinated psychologist David Dunning. He wondered, how can someone be so disastrously wrong and yet so utterly confident? That single question inspired him, together with graduate student Justin Kruger, to launch the study that would give birth to what we now call the Dunning-Kruger effect. After the bizarre bank robbery, Dunning and Kruger wanted to test their theory. They designed a groundbreaking study where participants were asked to complete assessments on humor, grammar, and logical reasoning. Afterward, they asked them to estimate how well they performed compared to others. The results were striking. Those who scored in the bottom quartile dramatically overestimated their abilities. They believed they had performed better than 62% of their peers, when in fact, they only outperformed 12%. Meanwhile, the top performers consistently underestimated their abilities, believing they had done worse than they actually had. As Dunning summarized it, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize a right answer. This research revealed a fundamental issue. People who are the least skilled in something are not only unaware of their lack of ability, but they also don't have the necessary skills to even recognize their deficiencies. So how does the Dunning-Kruger effect actually work in the brain? It stems from a psychological phenomenon known as metacognitive deficiency. In simple terms, when we are incompetent in a domain, we lack the ability to accurately assess our own knowledge. In other words, if you don't know enough to do something well, you also don't know enough to recognize that you're not doing it well. This leads to a false sense of confidence. There are several mechanisms at play here. One is the unknown unknowns problem. When we venture into unfamiliar territory, we don't even know what we don't know. For example, when we first try to solve a complex problem, we often lack awareness of the full range of knowledge required. Another mechanism is confirmation bias. Once we form a belief about our abilities, we tend to look for evidence that supports that belief, while ignoring anything that contradicts it. A novice might remember their successes and interpret failures as bad luck or external factors, reinforcing their overconfidence. Lastly, there's the difficulty of self-assessment. Without clear feedback or external comparisons, humans tend to rate themselves as above average, a phenomenon known as the above-average effect. This is why most people believe they are better than the average, even when that's statistically impossible. The journey from ignorance to expertise is not a linear path. At the beginning, most people experience what's known as Mount Stupid. This is the peak of confidence where you've learned just enough to feel informed, but you haven't yet realized how much more there is to know. It's when you think you're an expert after learning the basics, but you haven't yet encountered the complexities. After reaching this peak, many then fall into the valley of despair. As they continue learning, they realize how much they don't know, and their confidence drops significantly. This can be a discouraging phase where people begin to doubt themselves and sometimes even quit. However, those who persist through the valley begin climbing what's known as the slope of enlightenment. This is the gradual rise in competence and confidence as they gain a deeper understanding of the subject. Eventually, they reach the plateau of sustainability. At this point, their competence is high and their confidence is appropriately calibrated. Interestingly, the best experts often exhibit a slight underconfidence compared to their actual abilities. This is because they're aware of the vastness of knowledge that still exists and the limits of their understanding. True expertise is often marked by intellectual humility, not arrogance. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just apply to academics or abstract theories. It plays out in real life, in many professions, and in our day-to-day interactions. In the workplace, for example, we often see employees who overestimate their performance and contributions. One study found that 95% of managers believed they performed in the top 50% of their peer group. A statistical impossibility. This inflated self-assessment can lead to resistance to feedback, lack of professional growth, and even interpersonal conflicts within teams. In healthcare, this effect can be dangerous. Medical students, who are still learning, may overrate their clinical abilities, leading them to make critical errors. One study showed that the doctors who were the most confident about their diagnosis were not necessarily more accurate than their peers, but they were less likely to consult references or seek second opinions, potentially endangering patients' lives. In politics, we often see the Dunning-Kruger effect in action when individuals with limited knowledge of complex policy issues speak with absolute certainty. Whether it's about climate change, economic theory, or international relations, those with only a basic understanding may voice their opinions loudly, while true experts tend to acknowledge uncertainty and nuance. Finally, the internet has given a platform for anyone to share their opinions, regardless of expertise. Social media allows people with little experience or knowledge to argue with specialists, creating what some have called an expertise crisis. It has democratized the expression of ideas, but also made it harder for people to differentiate between true expertise and surface-level confidence. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just an individual issue. It also varies across cultures. Research shows that cultural factors significantly influence how people assess their abilities and how pronounced the effect is in different societies. In Western cultures, particularly in the United States, self-promotion and confidence are highly valued. From an early age, children are taught to believe in themselves and their potential. This cultural emphasis on individual achievement and self-worth creates fertile ground for the Dunning-Kruger effect, as it encourages people to overestimate their abilities regardless of their actual performance. By contrast, many East Asian cultures place a greater emphasis on humility, self-improvement, and awareness of one's limitations. Studies have found that Japanese students tend to rate themselves below average on many dimensions, the opposite of the above-average effect commonly seen in Western cultures. This cultural tendency towards self-criticism may actually mitigate the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging more accurate self-assessments. In collectivist societies, where group harmony and interdependence are prioritized, individuals may be more open to feedback from others and less likely to hold inflated self-assessments that contradict the group's consensus. This approach helps people avoid the overconfidence often seen in individualistic cultures. Confidence is essential for success, but too much confidence can be just as harmful as too little. When we look at the relationship between confidence and competence, it's clear that optimal performance requires a moderate level of confidence. Too little confidence can prevent action, while too much can blind us to our own limitations. The sweet spot lies somewhere in between. Enough self-belief to take risks, but enough humility to acknowledge that we are not infallible. Interestingly, research has shown that slightly overestimating one's abilities can actually be beneficial in some cases. This small positive illusion boosts motivation, helps people take on challenges they might otherwise avoid, and encourages persistence in the face of setbacks. However, it's important to distinguish between healthy overconfidence that motivates action and the Dunning-Kruger effect's harmful overconfidence that prevents self-awareness. The key, therefore, is to find that balance between confidence and competence. Epistemic humility, or the ability to recognize the limits of our knowledge, is an important aspect of true expertise. It's a delicate balance, having enough confidence to act and learn, but not so much that it prevents us from improving. The Dunning-Kruger effect is pervasive, and recognizing it in ourselves is one of the hardest steps in overcoming it. The first step is acknowledging that no one is immune. Regardless of our intelligence, education, or experience, we are all susceptible to overestimating our abilities in areas where we lack expertise. Acceptance is key, realizing that we might be wrong and that our confidence might not be grounded in reality. Next, actively seek feedback. Ask trusted experts or colleagues for honest critiques. External feedback offers a perspective that self-assessment often lacks. The challenge here is to be open to criticism without becoming defensive or dismissive. It requires vulnerability and intellectual humility, but this is crucial to avoiding the blind spots created by the Dunning-Kruger effect. Another important step is deliberate practice. Focus on areas of weakness and actively work to improve them. Regular practice allows you to gain real competence, which naturally brings more realistic confidence. Importantly, feedback should be immediate and clear. Without it, you risk reinforcing the very overconfidence you're trying to overcome. Finally, cultivate metacognitive awareness. Think about your thinking. Regularly reflect on the limits of your knowledge and consider alternative viewpoints. As Socrates famously said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. This intellectual humility allows us to recognize when we don't know something and prevents us from overestimating our abilities. The Dunning-Kruger effect has profound implications not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. In democratic systems, the effect can influence electoral outcomes. Voters with limited knowledge of complex issues may confidently form opinions based on shallow understanding, leading them to support simplistic solutions to multifaceted problems. This creates vulnerabilities to populist rhetoric, where politicians with little expertise can exploit the public's overconfidence in their own judgment. In organizations, the Dunning-Kruger effect can lead to distorted hiring and promotion decisions. Employees with inflated self-assessments often rise above more competent, but more modest colleagues. This phenomenon can cause what's known as a confidence cascade, where an entire organization starts to value confidence over actual ability. This perpetuates a culture of overconfidence and diminishes opportunities for truly talented individuals to thrive. In scientific communication and public health, the Dunning-Kruger effect creates resistance to expert advice. Individuals with minimal knowledge in specialized fields may feel equally qualified to evaluate evidence as experts, leading them to challenge public health guidelines or scientific consensus. This has been particularly problematic during the COVID-19 pandemic, where misinformation and overconfidence in the absence of expertise spread rapidly. The Dunning-Kruger effect offers valuable insights into human psychology and behavior. By recognizing how overconfidence can distort our self-assessment, we can work toward more accurate self-awareness and personal growth. One of the key lessons is the importance of intellectual humility. Acknowledging that we don't know everything and that we can learn from others is crucial for progress. Continuous learning and self-reflection are essential to developing true expertise. We must be willing to question our assumptions, accept constructive criticism, and seek out opportunities to improve. Another lesson is the importance of empathy. Recognizing that the Dunning-Kruger effect affects everyone, even the most intelligent among us, can help foster a more compassionate attitude toward others. Instead of judging people harshly for their overconfidence, we can offer support and guidance, helping them recognize their limitations in a constructive way. Ultimately, the Dunning-Kruger effect reminds us that confidence and competence are often misaligned. True mastery requires a balance between the two. Enough confidence to take risks, but enough humility to learn from our mistakes and continue growing. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us that confidence and competence are not always aligned, and that recognizing our own limitations is essential for personal growth. The key to overcoming this bias is to cultivate self-awareness, seek constructive feedback, and embrace intellectual humility. Ultimately, understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect helps us navigate both our personal and professional lives with more empathy, patience, and realistic self-assessment. It reminds us that true mastery requires continuous learning, reflection, and the courage to accept that we don't know everything. As you continue on your own journey of growth, remember that the path to expertise is a balance, one that requires both confidence and humility, and most importantly, a willingness to learn. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's not just about being confident, it's about being competent in a way that's grounded in reality.